And welcome everyone to UnSpun episode 12 with Joe Atwill and myself, Jan Irvin. And today we've got an exciting episode, and I'm going to try to do as much of the talking as I can possibly do to help Joe out, because this is really Joe's episode. But Joe's feeling a little under the weather. He caught a cold during the week, so but what Joe has done since last episode, or maybe he started working on it a few days before then, was a breakdown and analysis based on his prior work in Caesar's Messiah and in Shakespeare's Secret Messiah regarding the typology that's hidden throughout the biblical narrative, etc. He's done similar analyses of Salinger's Catcher in the Rye. And as it turns out, the analysis of the One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey exactly parallels his other research. And so essentially today, this is sort of a part two of the trial of Ken Kesey, but with a focus on Joe's analysis in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Right, and the analysis that I did in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest should really be not a surprise, because Ken Kesey was so seminal to the counterculture. And anyone who's read the article Jan and I wrote called Manufacturing the Deadhead knows that the counterculture was a deliberate leading of a generation into cultural oblivion. This was orchestrated by, some unknown leadership committee, but it spread out through the CIA, MK Ultra, the Laurel Canyon music scene that has been documented by Dave McGowan, the Grateful Dead. These are all elements that Jan and I have shown in the past as basically were part of this destructive plan. And in the midst of all that, you have Ken Kesey. Kesey, there was two components to Kesey. One is he wrote a book, that was very famous and instrumental in kind of launching the counterculture, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And then the other part was his activity on the bus, in which he drove around and gave away LSD. And in fact, the giving out of LSD that Kesey famously did on his Dayglow painted bus was actually the second phase of his LSD giveaway program. The first was called the acid tests. And so when you think of Kesey in the light of the article, of the information in the article, you're obviously going to be suspicious of him. And then when you start connecting him into the associations that Jan has shown using the brain, it becomes basically beyond suspicion. He is a candidate as someone who's purveying evil. And then when you look at Tim Leary's statement that Jan presented 2 weeks ago when we did that show, where Leary talks about the bus as a component of the different cells,
the underground agents,
right? That were conducting the cultural destruction. I mean, at that point, you're pretty close to a conviction. Then when you look at Kesey's the audio tape that we played, in which Kesey clearly is lying his head off. I mean, we showed, I won't go into that analysis, but what was interesting is that Kesey talks about, among other things, among strobe lights and rock and roll music and love, all of which could not have been combined in 1959. This was obviously after the fact, because that was when the audio tape was made, supposedly. But Kesey gave a lot of references to Freemasonry. He talked about seeing a great eye on the ceiling. He talked about hieroglyphics and things you'd see, on the pyramids. And so that led me to question, what was Kesey's relationship to Freemasonry. And Jan has read, and on the postslaviana.org website, I have analysis of Catcher in the Rye. And I think that analysis is virtually incontrovertible. I mean, the parallels I show that to Freemasonry that Salinger's setting up are just almost self-evident. And it's frankly, it's just amazing excuse me, that no one's ever seen this before. But in any case, Salinger's connection into Freemasonry made me curious about why Kesey was hallucinating a great eye and hieroglyphics. And then when I started looking at the material that is in existence about Kesey, I came across a poster, and this was a hand-drawn poster of one of Kesey's first acid tests. In fact, it may have been the actual first acid test. It's simply a hand-drawn poster with words, "Can you pass the acid test?" It advertises the Warlocks. This was the Grateful Dead's name before they became the Dead. It's at Ken Babb's house, which Ken Babb's was basically the assistant of Kesey for the acid test. And then in the middle of it is a gigantic all-seeing eye of Freemasonry. So I thought, well, that's weird and suspicious. And I went out and got the book, read it, and then wrote an analysis of what I had seen. And the first thing I'm going to say is that the book contains, just as is found in Catcher in the Rye, cryptic typological descriptions of Freemasonry levels. And with Kesey's typology, he has 3 black boys in white suits, and they are keeping secrets. And okay, this is the highlighted concepts of this paragraph. And if you're familiar with Freemasonry, you know that the Master Mason is the 3rd level, and they wear clothes of black and white. So this seemed odd to me. And then when I went on reading this passage, they talk about how difficult it is for the nurse to find someone to
Make
fill
sure you're
these.
in the camera view there.
I'm sorry. They talk about how difficult it is to fill these positions. And that's because the person who's doing the analysis, Big Nurse, she can't find people that hate enough. You have to have not just hate, but a secret hatred, this capacity for keeping a secret hatred. She then adds to the team, and she picks a doctor to go with these 3 to be her team to control the ward. And the doctor is set up as a 33-degree Freemason. They do that by simply saying that the doctors who are trying to be analyzed as to which one hates the most, who have the most hate in them, the doctors last 3 weeks, 3 months. So there you have the 33. And so this changes the actual meaning. There's a way of looking at Cuckoo's Nest, which you see it's very beneficial. You see the Indian leaves at the end. Those of you who know the story, I'll just briefly give it. Someone comes to a mental asylum. It's a terrible place, tightly controlled. He can't get along with the authority. They basically lobotomize him, brain murder him. He had met a schizophrenic Indian while he was there. This Indian then kills him and takes the control panel, this giant technologic thing, smashes it into a window, and escapes into the countryside, where he will be regaining his sanity by his exposure to the countryside. So that's the general story, and it seems like you're talking about freedom and whatnot. But actually, once you understand the typology, you can see that there's a whole other way of understanding the story, and this is the real meaning of Cuckoo's Nest. And what that level indicates is that Kesey is basically part of this Freemason plan to debase culture, to destroy culture, and that the hero is not McMurphy, who is this individual who gets lobotomized, but it is Big Nurse and the organization she belongs to, which is a secret society called the Combine. So the Combine is clearly the idea that this would be something that people would celebrate is sickening, because the Combine is basically the organization which controls all of human behavior. Right. So if the interpretation I'm giving is correct, and believe me, folks, if you read the analysis, I don't think anyone will dispute it. If you do, please come to me and we'll discuss this. But I'm just going to read the description of the Combine, so you can understand what it is. So Kesey wrote, "She works with an eye." Right. This is a little cryptic relationship to Freemasonry. "To adjusting the outside world too." In other words, I'm going to paraphrase it. It isn't just inside the asylum, but the asylum is just a microcosm. So that Big Nurse works with an eye to adjusting the outside world too, working alongside others like her, who I call the Combine, which is a huge organization that aims to adjust the outside as well as she has the inside. Now, if you remember the control that Nurse Ratched has over the inside, you can understand what this society that Kesey is talking about will do. And then I'm going to go on. He wrote, "And I watched her get more and more skillful over the years. Practice has studied and strengthened her," this is Big Nurse, "until now she wields a sure power that extends in all directions on hair-like wires too small for anybody's eyes but mine. I see her sit in the center of this web of wires like a watchful robot, tend her network with mechanical insect skill, know every second which wire runs where and just what current to send up to get the results you want." Okay, what she dreams of there in the center of those wires is a world of precision, efficiency, and tidiness, like a pocket watch with a glass back. Now, this is what's being described here is the order that Freemasonry is trying to impose upon human activity. If you look at the dollar bill, you have that I forget what it is, but it says basically it
Ordo
says
pluribus
Ordo,
unum.
yeah,
Yeah.
New World Order is what it
Right.
actually means, and it and that's what Kesey is praising. See, this is what he's praising, and when you look at the book in the right way, what you'll see is that Kesey is celebrating the incarceration and brain killing, brain experimentation that is going on at the hospital.
Yeah, which is a literary fiction of what Kesey was seeing around him at Menlo Park and the
Exactly
Veterans
right.
Hospital.
Exactly right. So what you're getting with Cuckoo's Nest is a representation of MK Ultra written by someone who absolutely
Endorses it.
defends it and endorses it. And so when you read about the electroshock and the brain dead individuals and the fact that people are carelessly destroyed, their brains carelessly destroyed, what you're really seeing is a sick representation of MK Ultra. And I'll tell you that it's odd that this hasn't really been the focus of more attention. The kind of brain destruction, almost for fun, and if it fails, there's just no problem whatsoever. This would never occur at a normal mental institution. So Kesey should have been analyzed as a component of MK Ultra, because this is the only place that I'm aware of that these activities had ever occurred. So this is what the deep level of Kesey's book really is. It's an homage to Freemasonry. It's an homage to more than Freemasonry. He calls the organization that controls the world the Combine. And I wondered about that because Salinger simply called it a secret society. He didn't name it either. Of course, you can't name it because then, you know, the jig would be up. But he's called it the Combine. And I think he called it that because if you look at Kesey sitting, you know, backstage at one of the acid tests where the Grateful Dead would be playing, he would have had a great many secret societies, government agencies, and banking family members all backstage with him. I mean, it would have been a coven of evil that's almost hard to imagine. I mean, you would have had the CIA, MK Ultra, Tavistock, Freemasons, the OSS, the Mellon banking family, the Cargill banking family. I mean, these individuals would have all been there as insiders, either band members, the sound technicians, the financiers, the lyrics. Right. Okay, so that's why I think he calls this organization that he's praising the Combine, because really what he's referring to is this combination of secret societies and government agencies and powerful banking families that control the media and thereby control us. And it's really important to put Kesey's analysis of the Combine next to the cultural activity of the counterculture, because when you do that, when you take Kesey's own words and put them next to what goes on in the counterculture, you can see that he is really outlining a program of cultural debasement for an entire generation. And so the typologic level, which is the level of what the symbolism actually means, it indicates that the character McMurphy is what can be called as a Christ character. R.P. McMurphy, who is the basically the protagonist, or excuse me, the hero of the thing. And the surface level, he calls himself a gambler, a gambling fool, and all through the play he's called a gambler. He is this has been noticed by other scholars that Kesey has set him up as some kind of Christ type, or using Christ as for the basis for many of the storylines about McMurphy. But at the end, when he's confronted by Big Nurse after the fishing trip, Big Nurse says, you know, you have behaved as though you thought yourself a god. And this is the tip-off that you're talking about, not the Jesus Christ character, but someone else. And this is where you'd have to get into the analysis of Caesar's Messiah to see the bedrock symbolism that the secret societies use, which is the fact that Jesus Christ was a typologic character, and he was created to basically predict through his life and his activity the military campaign of a Caesar. The people who run the Combine, the secret societies today, know the Gospels typology. Salinger knew it. Kesey obviously has training in it. And I think it is it's an attribute of a certain level of Freemasonry, particularly high level, that these individuals must have achieved and given this information. And then they were able to use it as a platform to extend the typology. So with Salinger, you have a homage to Freemasonry that's cryptic, that is creating legacy for the organization. They can't be public, so they use this typology. It's the secret language that they record their military and political victories in. And so Salinger is recording that in Catcher in the Rye. And then the book itself damages culture. So it's two-pronged. On one hand, you have legacy, and on the other hand, you have an actual neuro-linguistic programming device that takes people into a debased case. In the case of Catcher in the Rye, the main character is sexually debased. He's an alcoholic. He's mentally ill. He's in all ways an irritating and just damaged person, but he's very seductive, and people have said that he was very influential, that this character Holden Caulfield was very influential on the leading up to the counterculture. With Cuckoo's Nest, it's the neuro-linguistic programming is much more obvious, because this Indian chief who is schizophrenic, destroys the technologic control panel and then returns to nature and thereby regains his sanity. You see, so anyone who is reading the book and who then would, for example, listen to the houseboat lectures, you know what I'm referring to?
Absolutely. The Alan Watts houseboat lecture. And I just found more connections to that last night, in fact.
Excellent. Well, the thing is that go to the brain and start firing these connections up, because when you look at Kesey's ending, where the schizophrenic chief regains his sanity by destroying technology and then going back to nature, think about someone who reads that and then listens to the houseboat dialogue, where Leary and Watts and Ginsburg are all recording how necessary it is for people to return to nature, right? And of course, drug use is just given. And of course, free sex is just given. And so, this is what Kesey was doing with the book, is he was seeding the ground so that later on, people would be more likely basically to fall into the propaganda.
Look at this. This is the first human being poster here, Joe.
Oh, God. That's just insane. Well, there it is, folks. Freemasonry is right there. Right there. I mean, there is the pyramid, the all-seeing eye. If you can't, folks, if you cannot see this stuff, you're just basically a sitting duck for cultural oblivion. So this is, a way to understand Cuckoo's Nest that will defend you against the neuro-linguistic programming element of it. It was designed as part of the program, and I just want to reference something. Everyone needs to kind of think about this. Jan uncovered the meaning and the importance of Gordon Wasson's MK Ultra pay requisition, because that document absolutely proved that Wasson was involved in the starting of the psychedelic cultural debasement. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Wasson's pay requisition just shows that the May 1957 article is a lie. It was a piece of programming to get kids to start thinking about taking drugs. And moreover, on the cover of Life magazine, if you look at it, May 1957, you'll see this black box which describes Wasson's article, and then at the bottom of it, it's seemingly talking about another article, but because it's all contained in the same colored background, the brain would take all this information in at once. The words teenage allowance, right? So now you can place Kesey in the right context, because Kesey's work is basically attached to the Life magazine cover. May 1957, Life magazine came out with the article. It talks about teenage allowances and the spiritual drug use in the Mexican desert by Gordon Wasson. And then a few years later, now along comes Ken Kesey. And then you suddenly have this idea that to regain sanity, you want to return to a primitive natural world. So this is the path of conditioning that occurred, and it all ends up in Woodstock. And Jan just posted a second ago, there is the, and this is very important. That's a great picture. Okay, now that black box, the top of it describes the discovery of mushrooms that cause strange visions. And folks, that is the first introduction to the American public of psychedelic
mushrooms.
There it is. Now, underneath it, you have the word teenage allowances. Bear in mind, Life magazine is owned by Henry Luce. Luce is Skull and Bones. Skull and Bones is a Freemason organization. So,
and not only that, but Henry Luce hung out with Gordon Wasson, who wrote that article, at the Century Club. Now, recently, a listener to, I don't remember which shows, or maybe all of them, wrote to me and mentioned that in Gordon Wasson's Life magazine article is, okay, so we have on the cover this subliminal message about teenage allowances with the drugs, while inside, Masha Wasson is written up in the article, which is Gordon Wasson's adopted daughter. She's the one who has prevented anybody doing real research to get into the Harvard archives. But she is 18 years old, I think, at that time, and listed in the article as an 18-year-old, and they're discussing her doing the mushrooms. So there's the connection between the cover and Wasson's daughter to promote the whole thing. So Wasson's daughter is the first teenage tool, essentially, used to promote this entire agenda.
Right. And of course, she didn't take it unless, Wasson was just literally insane.
Well, maybe, we don't know if they did or not, actually.
I would just say, what I'll say is this. Wasson's article is basically fiction. Wasson talks about the way that his wife and he became interested in mushrooms, and he goes on for 500, 700 words describing this event, when the fact is that anyone who looks at it closely can see that this is a fictional story. It's based on the story of Adam and Eve leaving the Garden of Eden. The typology is really transparent. It's not a difficult connection to make. So what I'm going to say, Jan, is that everything in the article has to be viewed as basically either typologic homage or a weapon. And I think that the claiming that his daughter is 18 years old, they gave her drugs which could produce psychosis, I think it's much more likely that that's just another piece of propaganda.
It's very possible, but it's it's debatable whether or not they did these substances. The CIA actually did require new recruits, et cetera, to take it. So it's at least LSD. So that's a good question. But it's very possible that they were all faking it just to promote it for MK Ultra Subproject 58, which is what Life magazine was. And of course, they also published that article in This Week magazine, which was published by Joseph P. Knapp, who worked with Wasson at Morgan Guarantee Trust. And so, we have another connection here, but that one went out to like 15 million or 19 million newspaper subscribers, something like that. But they coordinated these two publications. This Week, that went out into every newspaper in the 1950s. Everybody still read the newspaper. And as well as in Life magazine, going up on the grocery store shelves at the checkout counter. So everybody was bombarded across the country. Simultaneously, they were blitzed with the idea of psychedelic mushrooms. And then, we can go right here and see the connections to J.P. Morgan Bank. Again, I've already shown the Warburgs and the Mellon family on the screen. But of course, J.P. Morgan is who Gordon Wasson worked with. He was vice president of propaganda for J.P. Morgan Bank. And J.P. Morgan is also listed in the CIA's MKUltra Subproject 58 documents. And I've exposed that in the, oh shoot, no, I'm forgetting, in several of them. Spies in Academic Clothing, I think, is where I exposed that.
You've written too many articles, John.
All right. So what else can we add about the Combine and Kesey and the Freemasons? You know,
Well, I'm just gonna to help people. They have a representation of the what I call the Flavian Trinity, which is a little cryptic, but the first step is very easy. And the reason I want to go through this is just to show people how they need to read this material in order to get the understanding of what the author has to say. Okay, so Kesey talks about three what he refers to as chronics, and these are people that are essentially brain dead. And he talks about them as a trinity, one after the other, three of them. And there's the one named Ellis, one named Ruckley, and the other named Colonel Matterson. Right. Now, these three are in fact the Flavian Caesars, and the Freemasons, and these are the Caesars that actually created Christianity. The Freemasons are set up basically tip to stern against these individuals. These are the individuals that fought the war against the Jewish Messianic movement in the first century. They're the ones that created Christianity as a kind of mind control, basically after the war. And Freemasons, or the Tectons, as they're described in the Gospels and in the history of Josephus, but it's one organization, this Tecton group. They are focused against these three, and so Kesey then makes a representation of them, and he talks about Ellis as a chronic that got fouled up so bad when they overloaded him in that filthy brain murdering room that the black boys called the shock shop. Now he's nailed against the wall in the same condition. They've lifted him up off the table for the last time in the same shape, arms out, palms cupped, with the same horror on his face. He's nailed like that on the wall like a stuffed trophy. Well, I mean, this is obviously, a representation of someone who's being crucified. And then they go on, they say they pull the nails when it's time to eat. But anyway, the fact that this character is a representation of, or has some kind of connections to Christ, is well known. I mean, no one really understood why Kesey would do this, but what they don't see is the fact that you need to analyze the three as a trinity, because the next one is that someone named Ruckley, or play on the word ruckus, or madhouse, and this represents Domitian. And this individual simply goes around mindlessly saying, F the wife. I won't give the obscenity, but everyone knows what I'm talking about. So in other words, he's just sexually deranged, and he talks about effing a wife. Well, this is, he's representing Domitian. I'll read from Suetonius here. Domitian was known as a sexual degenerate, and Suetonius, his historian, recorded that that was even apparent what sort of man he was going to be, not to mention all the details, but after making free with the wives of so many men. So this is what Domitian was. He was famous for essentially having sex with the wives of other men, and so that's why he's Ruckley. Then Kesey goes on, and the third one he calls Colonel Matterson. Now, Matterson is just a variation of the word Matthew. Matthew in the Gospels is a tax collector, and in the kind of crazy Flavian typology, it's kind of relating to Vespasian. He was the oldest or the father of the other two, and he was the most famous tax collector in the Roman history. Now, he was very famous for collecting taxes. But anyway, now here's how they describe him. Here's how Kesey writes about it. It says, Ellis and Ruckley are the youngest chronics, right? They're younger because they are the two sons of the third one. Colonel Masterson is the oldest. This he must be Vespasian. And they could describe him as an old, petrified cavalry soldier from the First War. Now, in the surface level, this is World War I, but the First War and sort of the Freemasons of the war between the Romans and the Jews in the first century. And then it goes on and it says he is given to lifting up the skirts of passing nurses with his cane or teaching some kind of history out of the text of his left hand to anyone that will listen. Now, this is if you're going to be reading typologically, you have to pay attention to these things because, why in the world would they describe someone teaching some kind of history out of one's left hand? This indicates that Colonel Masterson is a false god because the person who teaches history out of the right hand is the God of the Old Testament, our Jesus Christ, both of whom are often described as basically teaching the God out of their right hand. So just as an example, in Matthew, that Gospel 22:44. God Jesus gives it the commandment, which he's paraphrasing from the Old Testament. He says, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet. So you can see the right hand of God represents truth and, strong theological connections. So the idea that Colonel Masterson is teaching history out of his left hand should be a dead giveaway, as that there's something going on. And since you've already established that one of the elements of the Trinity is involved with the character of Jesus with Ellis, which is transparent, then that's how typology is structured. You set up one very overt parallel and then you make very subtle ones around them. So this is kind of a secret language. To really get to it, you need to start with Caesar's Messiah. And then when you come to something like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, it will, the story will make perfect sense. And I'll just explain the title. Cuckoo's nest would be, the cuckoo was a bird that would invade other birds' nests and put an egg there so that the birds would raise someone that, which was not their own offspring. And this is Kesey's description of Christianity, basically, is that it is a cuckoo's nest. It's a madhouse, which has a false egg that has been planted in it by someone who's not Jewish. In other words, the character Jesus Christ. So that's what Kesey refers to with, one flew over the cuckoo's nest. It's just a reference to the idea of the fake ethnic identity of the authors of the Gospels. So there you have
Very
it.
interesting. Well,
and it's like that article, for those that are curious, you can get that at postflaviana.org. I sent it to Jan, and he might actually post it a link to it at the Gnostic Media site, so that people you don't need to go to the Flaviana site. You can
sure.
just
When I get the video for this episode, I will post it on the notes for.
I think there's there'll be a lot of stuff which people will not understand, but I think that the connections to Freemasonry are really going to catch people's attention, because they are, when you start seeing, that sure looks like a description of a secret organization that Kesey is engaged in. And then when you couple that with all the other evidence that we have documented around Kesey, I just think, to argue, well, that he just accidentally, created an homage to a 33-degree Mason and the third level of master masonry. I mean, I think that's just forget about it. That didn't happen. So what you're dealing with is a lifetime actor, Jan, Ken Kesey.
I meant to bring up the other week when we were doing the show on Ken Kesey that years ago, I guess it was in 2010 at the MAPS conference. This was back when I was just waking up, and I, went to this thing knowing full well that half of the people there would be Intel, but I wanted to find out more about it, and so I went. I'm just looking for a name in the database. So I met somebody there who gave a presentation, and I need to go through it again. And I believe I took photos of all of the slides when I was there, but I met Jerry Garcia's wife, Carolyn Garcia, Mountain Girl, there at the conference, and I had gotten her phone number, and I talked to her on the phone, tried to get her to come on the show back then. She didn't accept the offer, but she's also one of the original Merry Pranksters as well. And so I recalled that after, we were talking about that audio clip of, Kesey's supposed released experimental tape, from the CIA studies there on him at Palo Alto. It occurred to me that strobe light thing, and then Carolyn Garcia making a reference in that episode, in that presentation, that Ken Kesey is who gave them the idea of rock music and strobe lights. So I really need to get back and go through that, because we can see that all the Merry Pranksters were not only involved but aware of the larger thing going on there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, think about it. Mountain Girl, the story that she tells is, high school graduate, just kind of ends up somehow in Stanford,
Right.
working as a lab technician. I mean, how does that happen? At the same time that, you have Robert Hunter and Kesey, Gregory Bateson. I mean, there's all of these weird and unbelievable stories that bring all of these people into this research, which what is and now is vetted as a research facility for MK Ultra. And so, what I think is going on there is they're training these people in neuro-linguistic programming and basically how to get people to how to debase people to the max. That's why. And then you compare that to the story that Stanley
Right.
Osley tells.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it's Osley Stanley.
Anyway, well, he says, I checked myself into St. Elizabeth Hospital.
Augustus Osley Bear Stanley.
Right. I checked myself in for a year and a half. Right. He's like 17 years old. And this is exactly the time that St.
Make
Elizabeth...
sure you're closer to your mic. You're getting pretty low there.
I'm sorry. This is exactly the same time that MK Ultra is doing experiments there. People don't check themselves in for a year and a half to mental institutions when they're 17 years old, and then simply the next day leave and go and become a sound engineer in the Air Force,
and then leave it, and like Kesey go on to lead, as is said with him, go on to lead major MK Ultra CIA operations.
Right, and so the whole thing is just the believability is a house of cards, John, and I think that it all, is related, and it all supports itself. The apparatus we're building is one that's on a solid footing, very solid footing, because we have primary documents.
Well, this is the first time that the CIA isn't controlling the goddamn conversation regarding MK Ultra.
Exactly, and in the article that I write on Cuckoo's Nest, I show people. I go, look, you have the Gordon Wasson May 57, where you can just absolutely see the neurolinguistic programming. You can see the plot. You can see the future, because you can now go back using the brain and you can trace these individuals in their, you can go from Wasson to Kesey to Leary. You can actually trace all this. But I show in the article that Gregory Bateson that arch criminal was at the back of all this, because he developed this idea you could control people with this archaic revival. And this is what the counterculture is. And, Jan, as you go forward and you get to MK Ultra in this, collection of individuals, who do you it just amazingly happens to be there at that facility, at the Palo Alto VA, Gregory Bateson. He's working there at that time.
Right. Well, and he's the one who dosed Ken Kesey there, so the founder of the CIA.
Right. And so,
and people buy this crap, and they actually believe that, that Ken Kesey magically, the magical bus, magically got the truckload of LSD and, away from the government and just, snuck away. He stole it and snuck away with enough to dose tens of thousands of people. But never mind that he was dosed by the founder of the CIA. And when you get that the whole Manchurian Candidate and all of this nonsense is just a red herring to send people the other direction, when you get that the whole operation is the degradation of society, that it's a multi-pronged attack, it's not the one thing, then you can begin to understand that the counterculture, the psychedelic revolution, is the bulk of the MK Ultra program. Sure, they probably did some Manchurian Candidate stuff, but what they did is they took, a handful of operations that didn't work under MK Ultra. Never mind that there were at least 150, but they took a handful of them that weren't so successful, at least so we're told, and they tossed those out to the public as scapegoats to lead everybody astray. Follow the scapegoat. For the last, since 1979 at least, and even earlier, 78, I think, with Walter Bowert's work, but 79 with that garbage work by, John D. Marks, The Search for the Manchurian Candidate. Of course, John D. Marks was the assistant to the director. He may have later became the director. I can't remember. Assistant to the director for the Bureau of Intelligence and Research. Now, come on, folks. I mean, really, you're going to believe that a bunch of clown agents releasing this stuff is viable information? I mean, you have to check these people's backgrounds. Where do they work? What are they doing? I mean, John D. Marks, it didn't take me long to figure out that he was working for the U.S. State Department, working for the Bureau of Intelligence and Research. He was Institute of Noetic Sciences, Harvard Politics, Harvard Law School. That's where Rick Doblin went as well, but and Barack Obama for that matter. But Institute of Noetic Sciences, well, guess what? That whole microdosing scam that's being promoted, that was started up by Dr. James Fadiman years ago, and I've been trying to expose him for a while. And Institute of Noetic Sciences also had Dr. Willis Harriman there that we've repeatedly shown was MK Ultra, and a number of other guys were there. And then the Institute of Noetic Sciences is connected to the Naropa Institute, and there's similar themes, and the Esalen Institute. We've repeatedly shown the heavy connections between the Esalen Institute and the CIA. Just, look at, I'm going to put this on screen again just so that people can see. Look at the connections here, folks, between the Esalen Institute and the intelligence community. All these connections in red are vetted agents. It doesn't mean that the others aren't. I mean, the red are top level. Sometimes like Albert Hoffman, when I know they're dirty, I'll put them as yellow. But the red ones, these are the hardcore leading people. And, Joe mentioned Gregory Bateson a little bit ago. Well, where's Gregory Bateson? He's right up there, one of the key people behind the Esalen Institute. I mean, if you see a Huxley, if you see a Bateson, if you see a Leary, a Wasson, these are, the Keseys, et cetera. These are the core people behind MK Ultra. And you repeatedly see, about 60 or 70% of the people that I've vetted in researching MK Ultra do have a Jewish background as well. And that's another, connection that needs to be discussed. But, here's the Macy Foundation right there with, this becomes part of the influence of what became the Esalen Institute. Here's Project MK Ultra. that video that we showed last week, with Leary and Albert Hoffman, et cetera. Here's Oscar Janiger sitting right there. Here's Humphrey Osmond, who was sitting on the couch in that video. These people are all red. Here's Al Hubbard. Al Hubbard, known, admitted agent all the way through and through. Here's Dr. Willis Harriman. Again, these are all vetted MKUltra people, but all of these people surrounding the whole MKUltra, Ken Kesey thing. I mean, how does it go on, ladies and gentlemen, from the 1960s to now, except for maybe a couple of publications, that anybody's bothered to map this stuff out? I mean, your children got their brains wasted on the CIA's drugs, got led around by their cults and their new age religions and et cetera. And I mean, it's inexcusable that nobody else has put this stuff out. How does that happen? Abram Hoffer created the word hallucinogen. He worked with Humphrey Osmond. Humphrey Osmond created both the words psychotomimetic and psychedelic. Humphrey Osmond worked with Aldous Huxley's private doctor. Aldous Huxley headed MKUltra. Come on, people, wake up.
It's so interesting when you look at the counterculture and then you look at the CIA and government spook operations, you can see that one just waves into the other. In other words, that when you look at the brain, that's just such a clear visual way of understanding it, is that everything that we see as common, culture that's manipulating people and getting us, we're going to Esalen, we're listening to the rock and roll music, we're taking the drugs. All of that stuff is coming out of this wave that's coming from, the government, coming from the CIA. That is just overwhelming evidence that that's really what is in back of all of the counterculture.
Right. You know what? I want to read that West quote, Louis Jolyon West. Let me see if I can find it. All right. So he says, and people have a really hard time a lot of times in grasping how the CIA could use these substances for mind control and, how partying and all of this stuff. But when you get that it's about focusing on navel gazing rather than being out and being effective, when you realize that it's about getting caught up in new age nonsense and quantum physics. I mean, quantum physics has been repeatedly disproved, but this nonsense is sold to trick people, to mind control them. But here's the quote from Louis Jolyon West. The role of drugs in the exercise of political control is also coming under increasing discussion. Control can be through prohibition or supply. The total or even partial prohibition of drugs gives the government considerable leverage for other types of control. An example would be the selective application of drug laws permitting immediate search and or no-knock entry against selected components of the population, such as members of certain minority groups or political organizations. But a government could also supply drugs to help control a population. This method, foreseen by Aldous Huxley, come on folks, in Brave New World 1932, has the governing element employing drugs selectively to manipulate the governed in various ways. To a large extent, the numerous rural and urban communes, which provide a great freedom for private drug use and where hallucinogens are widely used today, are actually subsidized by our society. Their perpetuation is aided by parental and other family remittances, welfare and unemployment payments, and benign neglect by the police. In fact, it may be more convenient and perhaps even more economical to keep the growing numbers of chronic drug users, especially of the hallucinogens, fairly isolated and also out of the labor market with its millions of unemployed. To society, the communards with their hallucinogenic drugs are probably less bothersome and less expensive if they are living apart than if they are engaged in alternative modes of expressing their alienation, such as active, organized, vigorous political protest and dissent. The hallucinogens presently comprise a moderate but significant portion of the total drug problem in Western society. The foregoing may provide a certain frame of reference against which not only the social but also the clinical problems created by these drugs can be considered. Again, Louis Jolyon West was one of the CIA's researchers. He's the infamous guy who killed the world's largest elephant at the time by injecting the elephant with a massive syringe full of LSD, Tusco. And so that's the clown that did that. Now, I also want to read a quote from Leary's professor at Harvard, David McClelland. It is probably no accident that the society which most consistently encouraged the use of these substances, India, produced one of the sickest social orders ever created by mankind, in which thinking men spent their time lost in the Buddha position under the influence of drugs, exploring consciousness, while poverty, disease, social discrimination, and superstition reached their highest and most organized form in all history. Now, this is the nonsense, new age, quantum physics, spiritualist propaganda, getting everybody to believe in magic and primacy of consciousness and all of this nonsense. This is what it leads to. This is not a joke, folks. You need to grasp that mysticism is the tool of tyrants. This is how they controlled the population since the time of the Mahabharata. We're talking like 6,000 years ago.
And that's why they developed LSD. That's why they went out of their way to get the most powerful psychosis, schizophrenic producing a drug that they possibly could. And that's why they gave it to the public.
All right. So we have a few minutes left. You want to give out your information? I guess we should. That's probably too much time left to talk about our websites, huh?
I guess. Anyway, so I want to extend once again our offer to Zane Kesey. I hadn't read his father's work, and now that I have some very, very pointed questions to ask Zane about Ken Kesey's relationship to MK Ultra. I'm really starting to wonder about Zane. I know that he's done a repeat of the bus,
right at last year, 2014, he started a whole repeat of it.
Yeah, and so this is troubling, and I really think
and promoted in Vice magazine of all places. Of course, what is a Vice when we think about it?
Right. So, so look, I would just tell our viewers that we are unfortunately in a situation where the governments have been taken over by the Combine, by this collection of secret societies, and they do not have our goodwill as their intention. So we need to really exchange this information as fast as we can, because believe me, you can see that the new media is starting to cut, and I'm sure that they are worried about this kind of information circulating on a mass scale. So while we have the freedom, this is the time we need to exercise it. So anyone who goes to the Brain, goes to Gnostic Media website, look at the analysis that we've done, listen to these shows, and you agree with this analysis, then you have the responsibility to go out and to try to organize the people
And not only that, but while you're at the websites, donate and fund the research so that I've got a trip planned to New York to get to Woodstock in the next few weeks.
Absolutely.
And, need to get out there and start working on the Woodstock project. And there's some other research that I'm going to be doing out there. So any support you, the public, can offer is greatly appreciated. Also, please, support, buy Joe's books, buy my books. Some of my first book is getting outdated in its content, and I've discussed that in the articles, but also support and donate to CCN and support them so that they can continue and we can continue to spread this information across Europe as well as, the United States and the West. So
thank you very much, John. That was very interesting. I'll be signing off. And
All right. Well, I think we still have about 20 seconds or something left. So.
we got 20 seconds.
Well, anything else you want to add there? I don't know. We can just.
No, I've given my spiel. I want to thank everyone for listening, and promise them that next week we're going to have a show that's even going to be better than this one. So please tune in.
Yep. See you then. Take care, everyone, and good night.
Good night.
Thank you for tuning into CCN. This unique network is dedicated to free and independent media. CCN was created with the belief that information is the common heritage of all beings, which is why our live stream high-definition broadcast is easily accessible and free to view. If we want to change the world, we must first change the media. Having produced over 1,000 shows in 2015, which are all archived on YouTube, we look forward to bringing you more groundbreaking, cutting-edge information in 2016. For more information on what is on, please check out our broadcast guide for weekly updates. CCN broadcasts in multiple languages and features some key voices of our challenging times who are all in pursuit of a free, fair, just, sustainable world. CCN belongs to you, the people, and it is up to you all to keep this network on the air. Please contribute to the Network Support Fund or visit the CCN shop. We thank you all for supporting free and independent media.